We knew for 5 years that they had nuclear weapons before we announced it publicly, and we did very little. So this is where I would argue it was a policy failure, not an intelligence failure. We knew. So now it's more important than ever to understand the intelligence and then to act on the intelligence, not act on wishful thinking. And that's what I think we're faced with right now with this administration and others. My think tank is nonpartisan. We only look at the facts, and the facts are this. We have rogue nations which have the desire to destabilize our influence globally, period. With that said, then we have to assess our need to establish a strategy to deal with that, and then invest in that strategy regarding funding. Right now we're about to go through some very heavy reductions regarding the fiscal cliff and then sequestration. I don't think it's in anybody's interest to allow that to happen by the fact there are real threats out there that we have to deal with, and that's why I will talk a little about this. There's weapons out there that are highly exotic, that are science fiction. Well, they're really not science fiction. Things like electromagnetic pulse, EMP, you may have heard of it. The sun produces it, can devastate power grids. Well, other countries have invested in that. They now have the ability to use these weapons against us, to take out power grids. We're just seeing in New York and New Jersey what it's like to not have power for weeks on end. Imagine that on a global scale. Imagine our adversaries having a weapon that can use this. They developed that. The reason I know this, because we developed a similar class of weapons. So this is not science fiction, this is science fact, and we have to be cognizant of that fact and work again towards the worst case scenario. And again, a device being used, a terrorist group getting a device, not a rational actor. And I'll talk about rational actors in a second. While we've been developing nothing, all of our weapons that we currently have in silos ready to use are from the 1970s. Does anybody in this room know anyone who drives a 1979 Pinto? Seriously, think about it. But that's the level of technology of our nuclear fleet. Think about that. Nobody has done that. And we're not talking about doing new weapons. We're talking about upgrading what we have. Think about that. It's an investment in maintaining what we have, not building new ones. And I agree with our panel. There's no way nuclear weapons will ever go away at this point. Therefore, we have to take a practical step forward to establish what we calling in the old days the reliable replacement warhead. Something is actually dialable, something can be used against our adversaries precisely. Because frankly, one of the things we have to do is have a credible nuclear deterrent. The nuclear deterrent is what got us through the Cold War. We invested heavily in it. It's still something we should be looking at. With that said, we have a lot of changes now from the Cold War. We have bad actors. We have former bad guys like the Russians, for example, who gave Muammar Gaddafi 10,000 centrifuges. Several thousand of those are still missing. We've recovered some. But again, that was not a friendly act by the Russians. So, we've got to look at this practically. A.Q. Khan, same thing. Someone who is as a member of a supposedly allied country, Pakistan, has done bad things to help adversaries of ours develop nuclear weapons. An asymmetric threat is what we have to look at now. And that's something we have to continue to invest in regarding this is a fact of life. We no longer have a monolithic enemy as the Soviets during Cold War. We have multiple rogue nations. This is why we have to look at networks and how they would develop those networks to use against us. Again, they would come under the radar. They would do something called asymmetric. If you don't know what that is, I recommend you look it up. Asymmetric is something that our adversaries are planning to use against us by the fact that we're vulnerable in certain areas. The soft underbelly, if you will. So this is why we have to look forward to developing capabilities to look at our blind spots, to look at the world through their eyes, not our eyes. Goes back to my metaphor regarding Angola and high school. I had to look at the world through the adversary's eyes to understand better how to deal with them. That's something we have to do now, and I'm sure Congress is taking that tact as well. With that said, we have a country in the form of Iran who is a bad actor, period. They've funded Hezbollah, they've funded Hamas, they've given them weapons to use against the Israelis. And if that's not prompting a response from the Israelis, I don't know what is. But more importantly, as Joe mentioned just a few seconds ago, service. We have servicemen and women who have been killed by Iranian-developed weapons in Iraq and Afghanistan. Let me tell you a little story. I wrote a book called Operation Dark Heart, came in back in 2010. There's a chapter in there where I go about breaking. We don't touch the guy, trust me. But we do an interrogation that lasts about 3 days, FBI and I, to break a brother of the member of an Iranian intelligence service, the IRGC. Took us 3 days. He admits, eventually, his brother was sent there with $65,000 to stir up terrorists against us. This is eastern Afghanistan. This is on the border with Pakistan. And this is 2003. So the Iranians have done all sorts of things to stir up mischief. Do we really believe somehow they're going to turn over a new leaf at this point and not do the nuclear weapons if that's to their advantage? So again, my message here is be practical. Let's not pretend that people want to be our friends. Not everybody wants to be our friends. With that said, we have to look at how we can work responsibly with other nations. Let's remember the French, the British, a number of our allies have always had weapons. They're not a threat. They are rational actors. And again, our deterrent system has always worked very well to maintain that as a system. What we have to do now is invest in safeguards. The safeguards of the weapons we do know about, with the Russians, with the former states of the Soviet Union, to make sure those don't go loose. Next, we have to look at how we enhance our intelligence and have a very strong special operations command. Through sequestration, originally the thought was to stop the budget loss to Special Operations Command, fence it at 2%. That's not a lot of money out of our defense budget. Special Operations Command are those guys who have to go out, I've been with them, have to go forward to get these things should they become loose and should they be heading our way. We have to invest in that. We have to have a very strong response capability to prevent nuclear weapons from showing up. Loopholes. We have a lot of loopholes. Congress is working very hard to establish stops from getting around those loopholes regarding sanctions, but they're not enough. We have to do more. BAE, Dubai, are all allowing things to get through still, even now. There's back doors, so we have to be more practical about this. As well as the fact that the North Koreans continue to cooperate. While we talk about blast effect, some would argue the last blast that the North Koreans conducted was not about trying to do a bigger weapon, it was about miniaturization. It was about a plutonium bomb that just didn't work quite right, because plutonium is a bit more hard to handle than uranium. I know I'm getting tactical here, but this means something. And I think whatever the North Koreans were doing, the Iranians are getting full benefit of. Again, there's no reason to think not. We keep hearing from the intelligence community there's no evidence of that. Really? There's no evidence of a lot of things that turn out to be true otherwise. You have to assume the worst case, and we do know there's a relationship there. So we have to look at that realistically and understand how we need to act effectively to prevent this sort of thing from happening. The Greens, as mentioned, a good friend of mine, Reza Khalili, a defector who worked for the CIA, talks about this all the time. Our answer is not war. Our answer is to actually increase the potential for what I would call the Persian Spring. The Iranians are not Arabs, they're Persians. They have a very long tradition of being Persian first. We should act on that. We should encourage the Green Revolution. We should encourage democracy, these young kids from rising up to become more like us because they want to be like us. They want that freedom. We should encourage that. And I think we missed an opportunity in 2009. There's going to be another opportunity next year we should look into. So, in conclusion, we've got to look at the truth for what it is. We cannot afford wishful thinking at this point in time. We tried that in the 90s. It didn't work well because we had a North Korea that ended up with nuclear weapons, and they've remained a thorn in our side ever since. I would encourage all of you students of the world, to look realistically at what's best, not only for us as the Americans, but the world in long term. There are rational actors still in Iran. They depend a lot on the economy. Scientists who are developing these things are rational. Scientists have to be rational and logical. So there is something there to get to. We have to get there. And we have to start working very hard to get there very rapidly, because this threat will not go away, it will not diminish, and they've been emboldened by the past 4 years. So what we need to do now is be practical, be real, establish a path forward for doing the right thing. Again, this is not just about us. This is about the Israelis. This is about the world. It's about good order. It's about economic viability for everybody who wants to be free and grow, have a nice family, grow old all together, and see things better for the next generation. Thank you all for having me.
Thank you so much. Thank you. John, you want to make a comment?
Yes.
I'm going to open this up in a minute.
I wanted to emphasize what Tony said about seeing how your adversary thinks. Failing to do that, thinking they always think like us, is what is known in the strategic trade as mirror imaging. And it can lead to great misunderstandings. The Israelis pulled out of Gaza, the Gaza Strip, which you probably heard about a few weeks ago, and they thought they'd get perhaps peace there, or just a few occasional attempts at minor terror. Instead, they got 8,000 rockets, and they got another few thousand just a few weeks ago. When we pulled out of Somalia, we thought we were showing a sign of restraint. We'd had there a thing called Black Hawk Down, a disaster, but we decided not to escalate. It was one of the reasons Osama bin Laden thought he could come here and kill thousands of Americans. Or probably the most prominent historical example was in 38 and 39, when the British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain made conciliatory gestures, including giving up an ally, Czechoslovakia, to Adolf Hitler. And we got World War II and 50 million lives. Now, Hitler miscalculated when he invaded Poland, but that miscalculation was made possible because we thought he would interpret those things the same way we do. Basically, bad guys don't respond the way decent people do when you try and set an example, which is what we've been doing by reducing our nuclear arsenal. And instead, all over the world, arsenals are increasing in places that figure if we get low enough, we may wind up not even having the largest arsenal. And numbers matter if, in any crisis, one or more nations involved think they matter. It doesn't matter whether we think they matter, and the people in this administration don't think so. But if you get in a crisis, and the other side thinks so, they may behave differently, which at least changes the risks in the crisis, maybe not the result. In 1973, I'll end with this, during the so-called Yom Kippur War launched by Egypt and Syria against Israel, Soviet, today it's Russia, again a smaller part, but Soviet Union Navy and the United States Navy were eyeball to eyeball, as it was said, in the Mediterranean. And afterwards, Richard Nixon said to his National Security Advisor, President Nixon, you know, we were close to a nuclear confrontation. They were much more aggressive than they had been in 1962 because they had begun a military buildup and their strategic nuclear arsenal was almost as large as ours then, where it was much smaller in 1962. They thought it mattered, and it didn't matter whether we thought so. And our adversaries, if they think differently than us, are saying they're wrong, you shouldn't think this way, is going to get us into a lot of trouble.
Tony and Joe, both of you talked very realistically about the Iranian question. And let me raise an issue with you, and hopefully we'll open this up to some conversation. What would be the appropriate steps in preventing Iran from having nuclear weapons, recognizing full well that this weapon is not only a military option for them, but a political option, giving them great influence over the entire Middle East? I wonder, sanctions so far have not done the trick, notwithstanding the fact that their currency is in distress, as you pointed out. But it does not appear as though there appears to be any limit on the kind of development that we've seen in the enrichment of uranium in Iran.
I'll go first real quick. I think we've made a mistake by not putting pressure on our so-called friends. The Russians have been involved in this, the Chinese have been involved in this, the Pakistanis have all been involved in this. So by the fact that we're here, I think we're too late with sanctions, we recognize now. With that said, the Iranians cannot have done this on their own. And that's what I think one of our mistakes, especially with the North Koreans. North Koreans have been very instrumental. It's ironic, apparently, reports that I've been told about the missile facility in North Korea, where they're about to launch their missile, is essentially a mirror image of one designed in Iran. So I don't think they just went to Kmart and found the same copy of the plans and built them separately. No, this is cooperation. This is in the intelligence business called a clue. So I think we have to look at how we use our allies to leverage this, because it ain't, we're too far down the road to think it's going to stop. We have to do other things, and some of that has to be possibly military action.
Thank you. Joe?
And it really is sad that, as you indicate, Russia has a internal extremist threat by Chechens. And so to me, it's just extraordinarily naive on their part not to understand that a dirty bomb, as I was describing in a TEU, couldn't end up in Moscow. And then equally unfathomable to me is China. They also have an internal threat. It's called Uyghurs. And it just, and so somehow we've got to really work with both of these countries in their mutual interest, our interest too, the world's interest. Now, North Korea, wow, that is, it really is the hermit kingdom. I sadly on my visit there, it was horrifying. It was a Potemkin village. What I saw was not real. As we flew in, right away you could tell something was wrong, because the hillsides, as you came in and the roads were not paved, no electricity, the hillsides up to about a third away up the side of the hill, the bark had been taken off the trees. That's what the people were eating. And then, as we got to the international airport, there were no cars in the parking lot. There was no electricity in the terminal. We went to the VIP greeting area, no electricity. And I was able, it was actually in English, they had arrivals and destinations. There was one flight listed to Carburesque, but it didn't indicate if it was a daily, hourly, monthly, yearly flight. So, and how sad. And so that's why I mentioned what a cutoff state that is. And so, they actually finance their state, sadly, with illegal drug sales. They are extraordinarily proficient at counterfeiting U.S. currency. It's just a bizarre state. And then, on the other hand, the best example you could ever find of the difference between freedom and virtual slavery is to visit Seoul, Korea, if you ever have the opportunity. When we visit on delegations, we go by helicopter flying around the city because the 8 and 6 lane boulevards are filled with brand new SUVs. As again, back in Pyongyang, no traffic at all. But what a contrast between freedom, democracy, and totalitarianism. So that is an enigma that needs to be addressed. But the country that we should be putting pressure on there is China again. The only true effective ally of North Korea, the People's Democratic Republic, is the People's Republic of China. And we should be working with them to make sure that there's not collaboration back with the Uyghurs that could result